BoogeyMan band coming round the bend. Is BoogeyMan band? Is BoogeyMan band?
Greetings, fellow Fright Fiends, and thanks so much for dropping by the Horror Zone channel. I hope everyone's doing well. This is a requested video from my good friend Celeste Willett. We have been friends for a little over 3 years now. She's someone I really respect, and she became my first patron. This was something that was Celeste requested. She asked if I would do a top 10 horror movie heroes and heroines, and this is something she had talked to me about before I had set up the Patreon page, and just, told her anything I could do. Like anything, was there a video, a topic that she wanted me to talk about, and this was one that she wanted me to talk about. So this took me a while. I think it just, the reason why it's taken so long, not only because of things that have been going on in my life between work and personal issues, but it was tough for me to come up with 10. And, I didn't want it to be, I wanted it to be fair. And there's some ways that I did this that some people might say is cheating, but this is my list. So without further ado, Celeste, I hope you enjoy this. Here is my top 10 horror movie and television heroes and heroines. So number 10 for me is going to be from the Friday the 13th franchise, and this was a character that appeared in 3 of the films, Final Chapter, New Beginning, and Jason Lives, and that is Tommy Jarvis. First played by Corey Feldman, played by John Shepard in New Beginning, and then finally by Tom Matthews in Jason Lives. For me, though, growing up, the Corey Feldman representation of Tommy Jarvis was my favorite, and one that, I looked to the most in terms of influential and a hero, because I was about Corey Feldman's age. When I saw Final Chapter, I was 10 years old, and I rented it at my dad's house. I had never seen it, and I remember watching it, and I was just taken with this kid who loved monsters and was able to outsmart the main killer at the end of the film. And it was a very scary film. I still think Final Chapter is the scariest film in the franchise because you have a young child in danger. And that was something that was not really shown in the first 3 films. The fact that the Tommy Jarvis character would go on for 2 more films, I just really identified with the other actors that played him because I was so drawn to the performance that Corey Feldman gave. So number 10 for me will be Tommy Jarvis from the Friday the 13th franchise. Now, number 9 for me is going to be Trish and Derry from Jeepers Creepers, the original Jeepers Creepers, played by Gina Phillips and Justin Long. Right away, the thing that struck me about this film is the relationship between Trish and Derry. The fact that it wasn't a couple, it was a brother and a sister, and the relatability between the two, they just had a flow to them. And I really think that the first 20 minutes of Jeepers Creepers, if that part of it had not worked, if they had had lesser actors, I really think the film wouldn't have been successful and be the cult classic that it is now. You are really with these characters and what they're going through. When they see the creeper dumping bodies down this pipe that leads into the church, and Derry wants to go back and investigate, and Trish doesn't, and you just love these characters. You're crazy wanting to do it, but at the same time, wouldn't you want to help somebody? There is that line where he says, what if it was you? What if it was you back there? The interaction between both Gina Phillips and Justin Long, it's a fluidity that you don't see in a lot of younger actors at the time in some of these films. Usually it comes off as very kind of forced, and it wasn't. These two seem like they could be related. It's a completely heartbreaking conclusion for both in different ways, but it's always haunted me for some reason, the ending of this film, and both of these characters are very, very important to me, and that's why I love Jeepers Creepers so much, not only for Jonathan Brecht, but for the characters of Trish and Derry. I just think Gina Phillips and Justin Long did a fantastic job, and that is why they are number 9 on this list. Number 8 on this list is a character I don't hear many people talk about, and that is the character of Erin, played by Sharni Vincent in the 2013 film You're Next, directed by Adam Weingart. This is a film that I've heard people compare it to, they said it was like The Big Chill meets Friday the 13th. But this was a really great film, and what I loved about this film is that it turned the tables on you. It deals with this family getting together, and they're attacked by these mass killers, so you're kind of thinking, oh, is this going to be like The Strangers? And it's not. It's just like a thrill ride through the entire thing, and the Erin character is a fucking badass, and I just absolutely love the way that Sharni Vincent played her. That you can tell that she's had some shit in her life, more about her past as the story unravels. But the fact that it doesn't have to be this whole long drawn out thing about finding out who she is, she shows who she is through her actions, and then there's just like little bits of dialogue where you find out a little bit more as the story plays out. But she is amazing in this film. I wish she had done more. The only other film I had seen that she did was called The House on Willow Street, which came out in 2016, and that's a really it's like a forgettable movie. It wasn't that great, but it was great seeing her again, and I just think she's fantastic in this role, and I definitely recommend people checking it out. She just kicks ass in this film, and yeah, it's a total thrill ride. So number 8 for me is going to be Aaron from the film You're Next. 7 for me is going to be Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise. Now, my introduction to the Alien franchise, I remember seeing pieces of the first Alien when I was pretty young. The chest burster scene, which just completely freaked me out. I'm going to say I was maybe 10 or 11. When Aliens came out, I didn't see it in the movie theater, but I remember my Uncle Tim talking about going to see it. Him and my Aunt Joanne went and saw it. This is when they were living in LA, and him telling me how scary it was and how insane it was. And I remember watching it when it debuted on HBO and loving it. And I knew who Sigourney Weaver was because of Ghostbusters. But in the second film, you know, she has to sort of confront her fears. After being in cryogenic sleep for 57 years, she wakes up and finds out that, you know, everything's different. She's in a different world, and she's afraid of, you know, going back to this planet that she had been on with her crew from the past and confronting, you know, what she's so terrified of. But she's such a very human character, and throughout the film you just see her rise above her fears and confront them. And that's why the last, 25, 30 minutes of this film are so just amazing and on the edge of your seat. I think Aliens, I love the original Alien, but Aliens is just what made me a fan of this franchise and this character. I think Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection betrayed the character quite a bit, but those first two films really just have always been perfect for me. They're perfect 1-2 punch. I love watching them, and I love Sigourney Weaver as this character. I'd always hoped that maybe they would bring Ripley back, but she is so great. I love her confronting the Queen and rescuing Newt, and then the whole fight on the ship at the end with Bishop and everything. I mean, what an amazing film, and what an amazing performance. And I've always loved strong female characters, and she's one of my favorites, and I just think she's a total badass. So number 7 for me is going to be Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise. Number 6 for me is going to be Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell in the Scream franchise. I just love the fact that she always takes on the killer at the end, and it doesn't have to come down to somebody protecting her. She's taking care of herself and trying to help others, and she's just, for me, she's the hero of the Scream franchise. It will be weird seeing Scream 6 without her, if that's the way it's going to go. As much as I didn't really feel like her character was necessary in Scream 5, it was still great to see her. I don't think they utilized her as strongly as they could, but again, it does fall in line with where the character would be after everything that had happened in the first 4 films. So we'll just have to wait and see. I do think that she will eventually make an appearance back in the franchise. She has to. I mean, she's a very important part of that franchise, just like Ghostface. I mean, you think of the Scream films, you think of Sidney Prescott, you think of Neve Campbell, and I think she's a total badass. I love that character, and she is number 6 for me on this list. Number 5 for me is going to be Nancy Thompson, played by the amazing, the beautiful Heather Langenkamp. Nancy Thompson appeared in Nightmare on Elm Street, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and of course Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, I had a huge crush on Heather Langenkamp growing up. I remember watching the first Nightmare on Elm Street film because of her. I was just fascinated by her and terrified by Freddy. So, I just remember just being completely in awe of that character, and I think that, again, it's kind of like Nightmare on Elm Street does have that misleading opening where you're following Amanda Wyss, the Tina character, and she seems like she's going to be the main protagonist, and then, of course, she's taken out of the equation very early, and now you're following the Heather Langenkamp, Nancy Thompson character. And just what she has to go through, and then just how she sort of figures out how to beat Freddy, how to outsmart him, and I love that. And she was such an important character for me. And then when you get to the whole Dream Warriors arc, working to help the remaining children that have survived Freddy, that are in this institution, and then that she sacrifices herself. One of the most heartbreaking character deaths for me was when Nancy Thompson sacrificed herself for Kristen and the others. One of the most effective endings to a film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. It was total badass and heartbreaking at the same time. It's probably my favorite ending in the franchise. That movie is just balls to the wall awesome. I was so happy to see her come back for New Nightmare, even though she was playing a version of herself, having someone that had gone through, a stalking situation in her real life, and then sort of mixing in elements that had Freddy coming into the real world. Heather Langenkamp is awesome, and I was honored to have met her. I got to meet her back in 2014, and we talked about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I think she was more taken aback by the fact that I was wearing a Jason shirt and not a Nightmare on Elm Street shirt. She said, I see who you're here to see, and because Kane Hodder was like a table over from where she was sitting. But no, it was great to meet her. She was very sweet, and for this Nightmare on Elm Street horror fan, it was a chance to meet someone that was a lifelong crush, and she couldn't have been more gracious. And she's still, I think, the absolute best in that franchise. Number 5 for me is going to be Nancy Thompson from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Now, here's where I kind of divert a little bit from the movies and go to the Friday the 13th television series. Now, John DeLeMay, who played Ryan Dallion in that show, the show ran from 1987 to 1990. John DeLeMay was in the first 2 seasons and the first 2 episodes, which was technically a 2-hour premiere for season 3, and then he bowed out of the show. But he was the star of the show, and as a kid, I was a very lonely kid. Not through any fault of my mother, but my mom was very protective of me, and I've mentioned it in other videos. I was kind of sheltered as a kid, and that's why I think I've became such a fan of art, of movies and books and comics and music. It was because I had to have something to keep myself entertained, and that was what I was drawn to. That was what was readily accessible to me. Now, when the Friday the 13th franchise premiered, I didn't watch it at first because Jason wasn't in it. It dealt with 2 cousins who inherit their uncle's antique store, and then they find out that he made a pact with the devil and sold these antiques, these cursed antiques, to his patrons. And their role is to get these antiques back. I love the whole concept of them acquiring the antiques and putting them away. They couldn't destroy them. They had to put them in the vault. The vault was built in the store's basement, and it was the only place that they could keep them safe from other people. That whole concept just fascinated me, and the Ryan Dallion character I identified with because he had a bad relationship with his father, and my father and I didn't really get along. We just didn't really communicate very well, and especially as I got older. And at that point, he had been in his 4th marriage, and so I rebelled and was kind of an asshole. Didn't really get along with them as I got older, but that side of, and Ryan and his dad didn't get along, and there's one episode called Pipe Dream that deals with that. But also Ryan was a fan of comic books, and there was one episode called Tales of the Undead. And when I saw that episode, and Ray Walston, who people will remember from like Popeye the movie and My Favorite Martian, he played the character Jay Starr, who had created this character called Ferris, which was this giant robot character. And the whole episode dealt with this cursed comic book. And after that episode, I was just hooked. And I loved the John DeLeMay character. I loved the way he dressed. I loved just the fact that he was an artist and he loved comic books, and he was somebody that was into stuff that I was into at that age. And when you're growing up and you're like 13 going on 14, you're trying to figure out, you're trying to find people that you can identify with and help shape who you're going to become. And he was just somebody that I really identified with. And when he left the show, I was heartbroken because the show wasn't the same for me after that. And I've been lucky. I've been able to talk to him. I did a video one time just talking about him as a horror hero, and I sent it to him. I have an autographed picture of him from when I wrote to his website back in 2002, and his webmaster sent me the picture. I mean, it was really cool. And he's still just a very important character and important actor from my youth, and I really wish that show had gone on. Number 4 for me will be Ryan Dallion from Friday the 13th, the series. Number 3 is going to be Peter Vincent and Charlie Brewster from the Fright Night films, of course played by the late great Roddy McDowall and William Ragsdale. William Ragsdale I was actually really lucky enough to meet this year, and it was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, because even though he is, I believe he's in his early 60s, he still looks like Charlie from Fright Night. I mean, he still has the same voice, and it was it was so surreal talking to him. I actually really had a hard time speaking with him. And he was so nice, and it was just such an honor to meet him. But I really identified with the Charlie character in that film because I was a young kid when I saw it. I was 12 when I saw Fright Night for the first time, and of course Charlie's supposed to be like 16, 17 years old. And I just identified with him. He was a fan of horror movies, and I love the whole thing of, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf. No one believes him. And it frustrated me, and I felt sorry for him. And, you know, he's trying through the whole movie to convince his mother, his girlfriend, his best friend, even Peter Vincent, that there's a vampire living next door to him. And the concept is hilarious, but it's played so well. And Tom Holland just knew a great way to balance that film with the comedy and the horror. There's just moments that it's just so fluid, and it takes a great auteur to do that. And I just think William Ragsdale played the character brilliantly. And I love that character. I was grateful that they came back and did Fright Night 2 together. But him and Roddy McDowall, that team, really I just identify the Fright Night films with them. And I can't separate those two because they work together as vampire killers. And, you know, you have Charlie, who's kind of in this situation in his life where Jerry Dandridge is going to kill him for knowing his secret. And then you have Peter Vincent on the other end of the spectrum, who's kind of being replaced. He's a relic of the past. He's somebody that Charlie identifies with because he's watched him in movies. You know, not being able to separate fiction from reality and trying to enlist him to help him kill Jerry Dandridge. And then you see Peter Vincent going through, like, he's going to get evicted from his place. He's been fired from Fright Night because he's not interesting anymore. Like he says, all they want to see is demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins. I mean, I just love that it's like these two characters, especially the Peter Vincent character who's scared, he's a coward, having to rise above their fear and do the right thing. And he does do the right thing at the end and helps Charlie, and eventually they conquer Jerry Dandridge. And in the second film, they conquer Regine Dandridge, Jerry's sister, and her brood of cronies. But yeah, I just love the dynamic between those two. I wish we could have gotten more films with both of them, but I just love the Fright Night films, and I love those characters, and I can't see one without the other. And again, it comes down to them doing the right thing to help people, and I just love that motivation, and it just made these characters endearing to me. And yeah, for number 3, it's going to always be Peter Vincent and Charlie Brewster from the Fright Night films. Number 2 is another vampire duo, and I'm sure people know where I'm going with this one, and that is going to be Ben Mears and Mark Petrie from my favorite movie of all time, Salem's Lot. Now, as a kid, I identified with Mark Petrie for obvious reasons. Again, he was a horror fan, much like Tommy Jarvis. He was somebody that was kind of misunderstood by his parents and his friends. I mean, there's, lines in the film like, this is the problem with Mark. It's Mark's hobby, collecting masks and assembling monsters from kits. It's what his dad tells Father Callahan before the whole, thing where Barlow shows up in their kitchen. Or the scene where his friends are like, why are you so into this stuff? And his dad saying, Mark, aren't you going to outgrow this stuff? I always felt like that. So many people in my family thought that everything that I loved was a phase. It was something that I would grow out of, that it wouldn't be popular with me for, too much longer, or it was just something that, eventually I would become a fan of sports and other things that people in my family were a fan of, and I never did. I mean, look at behind me. It's like it never left me. I'm still that little kid. I'm still that misunderstood kid. I didn't fit in, not even with my family. And there's a lot of duality to my life and Mark's life that I really just identified with. I mean, I think people in my family eventually accepted me, especially as I got older and became an adult. But when I was a kid, it was always like Ben Strange. And I think that's why I identified with the Mark Petrie character so much. And I just love, there's so many scenes in that film with Lance Kerwin that I love. My favorite scenes with him are when he confronts Danny Glick at his window with the cross. That's still a scene that gives me chills. That he was strong enough to resist Danny's invitation to open the window and let him in. That's his friend. And just the way he breaks down after, and then his father comes opens the door, hearing his son yell out, "Go away," but doesn't come in the room to comfort his son. And I always felt like that with my father, and I always felt like that in some ways with other members of my family, that There was a distance between us, and I just identified with that scene so much. The other scene is when, the whole thing in the Petrie kitchen, where, Barlow has Mark, and Father Callahan makes a deal with Straker and Barlow to let Mark go. And this is after Barlow has killed both of his parents, and he goes, "I think they're dead, Father." And Father Callahan's like, "Run!" And he goes, "I'm going to kill you." And that scene gets me every time. I think, and then to see him as a badass going up to the Marston house by himself to do what he told Barlow he was going to do for killing his parents, I just was like, the fucker's a badass. I love it. And Ben Mears, David Soul, I wanted to be David Soul. I thought David Soul was so cool. With his Jeep, yes, the door doesn't close. It was another little character thing that I love about that car. But Ben Mears was, again, somebody that was looked at strangely by the rest of the town. Small town, they're like, who's this guy? Even though he said he grew up there and his aunt worked at the Marston house when he was a kid, town still looks at him as a stranger, and nobody believes him. So you have the two characters of Ben and Mark. Mark being somebody that people look at as strange, even though he's intelligent, and then Ben being the person that's an outsider, a stranger, coming into town. And both of them are trying to convince everybody else that this is really happening. And they both band together to stop Barlow's reign on the town. And I just, like I said, I idolize those performances and those actors and those characters, and the film is just, it is the greatest film in history, in my opinion, and that's just me. I love it. It's like a warm blanket when I watch it. So yeah, number 2 for me is going to be Ben Mears and Mark Petrie from Salem's Lot. So that leaves number 1. Number 1 for me will always be Dr. Loomis from the Halloween franchise. And by Dr. Loomis, I'm not talking about Malcolm McDowell, who I like and respect, but I'm talking about the late, great Donald Pleasance, who played Dr. Loomis in 5 of the films. Now, he played him in Halloween 1 and 2, and then Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and finally, his swan song was Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Now, Dr. Loomis is very important to me. He's a very important character. He's somebody that was my bridge into the Halloween franchise. And that bridge was kind of laid, the foundation of that bridge was laid by my grandmother, Berdina. But she is my rock, and she is the one that made me a fan of monsters and accepted the fact that I was a fan of things that most kids were afraid of. She watched Scooby-Doo cartoons with me. We would always watch Hyde and Hare, the Bugs Bunny, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde cartoon. She accepted the fact that I liked what I liked. And for some reason, she always loved the Halloween franchise. I don't know what got her into it. My grandfather and her didn't go to the movies very much by themselves, and I know my mom never took her to see it. So it had to have been when Halloween premiered on television. And I remember the Dr. Loomis character, the fact that he was trying to right the wrongs of what had happened, of Michael escaping and going and preying on the town of Haddonfield. And I always say that my grandmother had a little crush on Donald Pleasance. I mean, who wouldn't? He's a sharp guy with his cool trench coat and his awesome beard. But I think, to be seriously, I think it came down to the fact that my grandmother is spiritual, she's religious, she's Catholic, but it came down to conquering evil. And that's what I've always looked at it as. Dr. Loomis is an extension of my grandmother. It sounds silly, but that's what I've always associated that character to be. He was for good. He was trying to do the right thing, no matter what. That was his drive. He was Captain Ahab, whereas Michael Myers was Moby Dick. And I think that's why the first 2 Halloween films, and I said this in a recent video where I talked about why I thought it was a mistake that they took Halloween 2 out of the continuity of the new films. I feel like the Dr. Loomis character, if they had concluded with Halloween 2, he completed his quest of stopping Michael Myers. And I remember when I saw Halloween 2 for the first time and realized that they had killed Dr. Loomis at the end of part 2, I was devastated. It stayed with me for years. It broke my heart because I was like, no, that's the hero. How do you kill the hero? It just was unheard of a little bit. Or it just was something that I wasn't used to, being a very young kid watching a very adult film. And I remember I was so excited in 1988 when Return of Michael Myers was announced and Donald Pleasance was coming back. And next to Halloween 2, 4 is my favorite in terms of that character. I feel like they betrayed the character in the writing a little bit with 5. And in Curse of Michael Myers, I feel like they cut a lot of what Donald Pleasence brought to that character out. And you see more of it in the producer's cut. But that character is everything to me. He's my favorite character, hero character from a horror film ever. I think Donald Pleasence brought so much class and humanity to that character. You felt his pain, you felt what he was going through, his dialogue, the way that he carried himself, the way that he treated the franchise with respect, and told Mustafa Akkad that he had to stop someday. He said, I can go up until 22. So he committed to 22 movies. The series will never be the same for me without him. As much as I love the new films, there's always an element missing for me. And I think that the cast is fantastic. I love Jamie Lee Curtis. I love everybody that has brought their A game to these films. But the person who made me love it and made its mark on me is Donald Pleasence. Donald Pleasence is the reason I'm the fan of the Halloween franchise that I am. And I sorely miss him. Every time I watch one of those films, I miss him. So, and thanks to my grandmother Berdina for making me a fan of, making me aware of the franchise and making me aware of this character, because I think without her, I don't know if it would have the mark on me that it does now. But like I said, that character is an extension of my grandmother and always will be. So yeah, number 1 for me will be Donald Pleasence, who played Dr. Loomis in the Halloween franchise. So that is it, Celeste. I hope you enjoyed this video, my top 10 horror movie heroes and heroines. It was a tough video to put together because it was hard breaking down all of these characters that I love so much and putting them in a format. And like I said, I had to kind of give my own little twist on it because it was the only way I could do this. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for being a patron. Thank you to both of my patrons, that being Forever Midnight, my buddies Jeff, Josh, and Brian, and my friend Celeste, who this video is dedicated to. Let me know what you guys think. Let me some thoughts down in the comments section below. Also, remember to support the sponsor of this video. And that is Kevin over at House of Mysterious Secrets. That's houseofmysteriousecrets.com. I've been buying horror collectibles from Kevin since 2010. Awesome collection of horror items like shirts, hats, toys, posters, soundtracks. If you check out the site, use code 9350 for a one-time 10% off. Tell them the BoogeyMan sent you. And also support me on Patreon if you want. Link is down below. Like I said, I'm going to start doing some more stuff with this. It might not be something I can do all the time, but I am going to start doing maybe some behind the scenes stuff, talk to you about some stuff that's coming up. Maybe I'll make a few videos special just for Patreon or air them on Patreon before I put them here on YouTube. I don't know. I'm still working it out because I want to be fair to everybody. I want everybody to get the same amount of content and the same dedication that I give, in both platforms. So, like I said, still working on it, but thanks so much everyone for the support. Thank you so much for making this one of the most successful years for the channel, and I promise there's some really good horror stuff coming up very, very soon. So take it easy, stay scared as always, and remember, you can't kill the boogeyman. Hey fellow Fright Fiends, just want to say thank you again for supporting BoogeyMan Ben's Horror Zone. If you're brand new to the channel and you haven't yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell notification so you're updated every time I drop a new video. I typically do this once or twice a week with new content. I've been doing this for over 11 years, and the horror genre is a passion of mine, and it really means a lot to me that I can share that passion with all of you guys. Thanks so much again for the support, and I'll talk to you again later. Take it easy, stay scared as always.